Robbie Barbero is a master's in public health. He's the co-founder of Mastering Diabetes and Amala Green, and he's the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Mastering Diabetes, the revolutionary method to reverse insulin resistance permanently in type 1, type 1.5, type 2, prediabetes, and gestational diabetes. He's a diabetes coach, educator, and international speaker who has been living with type 1 diabetes for more than 20 years. Since 2006, Robbie has used an evidence-based approach to his personal health and fitness built on a foundation of low-fat, plant-based, whole food nutrition. A graduate of the University of Florida, Robbie has a master's degree in public health from American Public University. And the reason that Marcia and I felt that it was important to bring Robbie to you today is for a couple of reasons. It's not the normal kind of interview that we do, but one of our missions is to promote healthy aging. And Marcia, as a retired nurse, has been on this path for a very long time. She eats a very healthy diet and she exercises regularly. I, on the other hand, have been struggling with my weight since I was 15 years old. I was raised on a very, let's call it a sugar-based diet. But luckily, I was never diagnosed. But I've known for a while that I'm insulin resistant. I do have a son who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 21, and his daughter was diagnosed when she was 5 years old. For years, I've been reading everything I could about proper nutrition, diabetes, and weight loss. When Robbie's book, Mastering Diabetes, came out, I immediately ordered a copy and was fascinated with it. I gave it to my son, which he actually never read. But when I turned 74 last January, I decided that this was the year that things had to change. And shortly thereafter, I found out about Robbie's Mastering Weight Loss program and signed up. I've lost 30 pounds in the last 6 months. And it's a lifestyle change. It's not a diet. But this prompted me to want to share Robbie's journey and his information with our audience. So many people our age are suffering from a number of medical issues, including type 2 diabetes. And everyone we've spoken to agrees that they certainly want to live a longer life, but only if they have a good quality of life, right? So that's the whole basis for the call and our talking to Robbie today to get his insights from his experience. So thank you so much for being with us today, Robbie.
It's so great to be here. You're talking about health span, right? Not just lifespan. We want to live a healthy life into our, older years. And it looks like you guys are leading the charge and leading by example, which is powerful.
We are trying to do that for sure. So let me start by asking you, when did your type 1 journey begin?
So I was diagnosed when I was 12 years old. That was January 26th of 2000. So over 24 years ago now. And I basically self-diagnosed myself. My older brother, I have 2 older brothers. The middle older brother was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 9 years prior to me. So my family was quite familiar with the condition. And I basically said, Mom, I'm going to the bathroom all the time. I'm thirsty all the time. I think I have diabetes, just like Steve. She says, no, don't be silly. You don't have diabetes. A little bit later, she flew to Florida. We were living in Minnesota at the time. So my mom and my dad, they flew to Florida to look for homes. So we were going to move there. We did. And while she was gone, she called to check in. And she said, hey, how are things going? I said, Mom, I couldn't sleep last night. I was cramping. She said, okay, go upstairs, use your brother's blood glucose meter and test yourself. And sure enough, my blood glucose was well over 400. And my brother, that's like 4 times more than what it should be especially if you're non-diabetic. Right. So my brother said right then and there, yeah, you definitely have type 1 diabetes. Pack your bag. You're going to be in the hospital for a few nights. We went to the general doctor. They sent us to the hospital. And then my parents flew back the next night. And my dad just said, hey, this is going to be an inconvenience, but you can still do anything you want in life. And I feel very lucky and blessed that I got I had parents that raised us that way, but also being the second person in a family meant that it wasn't like a shock to my parents. They kind of had some confidence. I was a little familiar with things, so it wasn't necessarily like the worst thing ever. It was like, okay, well, this is just an adjustment, and that's how we handled it.
Excellent. Now, you were only 12 years old. At that point in your life, did you have any idea what you wanted to do with your life as a career? And if so, did this change it?
I didn't really have a clear career path at that time. I was a competitive tennis player. I think being a professional tennis player would have been just great.
Uh,
um, but I was always interested in business for sure. And in school, at the University of Florida, I got my undergraduate with in business and also like event management. And then it was really when I started to learn about this lifestyle. So that was uh, December 2006 is when I really started to change into what we teach now, low fat, plant-based, whole food nutrition. Really started living what is now called the Mastering Diabetes method. And now we've really like coined it and put it all in a book and spelled it out. But Cyrus and I were living this long before it was really formalized. And so at that point, when I started to get this information and I started reading the research papers and learning about this topic, it was definitely in college that I became very clear that I wanted to be a diabetes coach. I wanted to share this information with the millions of people that need it. Worldwide, over 1 billion people are living with either some form of pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. A small number are living with type 1 diabetes. But the information I learned impacts everybody. It does not matter what form of diabetes you're living with. The mission of becoming insulin sensitive and reversing insulin resistance is for people living with all forms of diabetes and even beyond diabetes, right? You've learned that in the Mastering Weight Loss program. So that became clear in college. I even took a little bit of a break from college and considered dropping out, but I decided no, it'd be a good idea to finish my college degree and then, get into this. And I decided to get a master's a little bit later in life. But it's very clear that this is my path, and I'm really, serving our clients is like the best thing ever for me.
that's excellent. Also, what is 1.5
Yeah.
diabetes? I don't know.
So essentially, it's a slow onset version of type 1 diabetes. And what's happening is, so type 1 is an autoimmune condition, and type 2 is not an autoimmune condition. That's a lifestyle condition. So type 1.5 is where the beta cells have been damaged, like the insulin producing cells are damaged a little bit, and there are antibodies present, right? So you can test for diabetes antibodies. If you have one or more, you could be, qualified for type 1.5, also known as LADA, latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. That's another phrase for that. But basically, at this point, you're not really a full-on type 1 in the sense of like, oh my gosh, you have to go to the hospital, you need insulin now. Like, it's not like this dramatic onset. It's quite slow, and people need small amounts of insulin. But if they optimize their lifestyle, they can stabilize. There's a lot we don't really know about type 1.5 and what can happen in the long term, but that's basically what's happening.
Okay. Is it mostly in adults then?
It is, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Interesting. So, do your recommendations differ at all for type 1 diabetics, as opposed to type 2 diabetics? And also, how do they differ from people who may just be insulin resistant?
Great question. The answer is no. It's the same thing across the board. Now, if somebody's using insulin, there's a couple of nuanced approaches for, okay, insulin timing and the types of insulin you're using, that's of course. But as far as the lifestyle choices, it's
Yeah.
the same lifestyle choices across the board that make insulin work more efficiently. And that's what we want. Whether you are a person who's not been diagnosed with any type of diabetes or any blood glucose challenges, but maybe you're struggling with weight, maybe you're struggling with energy, maybe somebody is struggling with brain health, right? So Alzheimer's is also, in a sort of like vernacular type 3 diabetes, right? It's not an official term, but it's basically insulin resistance of the brain, right? So you want insulin to work as efficiently as possible to optimize your overall health. And that protocol is the same no matter, it's just really for humans. It's like if you're a human, we're the only species on the planet that's confused about what to eat. No other species, they don't debate about it. They don't think about it. If you have a lion in Africa, you take that same lion and you put it in, a zoo in Minnesota, you're going to feed the lion food. No questions asked, no really thinking about it, no debating. But humans haven't seemed to find a way to make this more complicated than it needs to be.
Right. And what is insulin resistance? Because a lot of people may not be familiar with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's define a few terms here. So insulin is a necessary required hormone that does a lot of different things, but its primary function is to take glucose out of your bloodstream and into your cells so you can have energy. That's its primary function. Now, when that process is inhibited, it happens slowly. Okay, so the process of getting insulin out of your bloodstream and into your cells, one way we measure like how well is that going is you'll test somebody's fasting blood glucose or you'll test somebody's A1C, right? And so somebody could have an A1C or a fasting blood glucose that's perfectly great. Let's say their fasting blood glucose is 90 milligrams per deciliter, right? You go and you get that number. That's good. That's a good number to have. But what you don't know in that picture is how much insulin was needed to usher that glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells, right? So you could have a large amount of insulin, and that is what happens. So insulin resistance is when your body is struggling to take the glucose out of your bloodstream and into your cells, right? So the sugar's building up and it's getting stuck in your blood. But as that's happening, in the initial phase, your body can just produce more insulin, right? Insulin is what allows that glucose to get in. Well, if it's not working, let's just produce some more and we'll just like jam it in there. And that's the early signs. That's like pre-diabetes, right? But that's insulin resistance, okay? Now, as that progresses, you let insulin resistance get worse, then you develop pre-diabetes. Okay, and then now your fasting blood glucose is maybe 105, 110, okay? It's not above that 120 threshold, but you're on your way. And so that's what it is. So insulin, it's like the actual definition, the dictionary definition, is the diminished ability of your body to take glucose out of your bloodstream and into your cells. Like that's the definition. But the question becomes, what causes it, right? What is and that's the real debate. That's where everybody's confused, and you have the low carb people saying their story, then you have the high carb people, low fat people, us saying our story. And the truth is only one of them, only one approach can actually make insulin work more efficiently. The low carb approach just says don't consume the glucose. Just avoid it. That's not actually solving the problem.
Gotcha. Okay, well that makes sense. So the standard advice though, for diabetics, is to manage your blood glucose by your medications, right? And no matter what you eat, like if you eat a lot of sugar, you make up for it with more insulin. But what is the problem with that approach?
So I would say, so for type 1s, that's definitely the story, right? It's like, we want you to feel normal. We want, because it happens to kids quite frequently. We want you to just be able to eat what you normally eat, just learn how to dose your insulin properly. That's the story. I think it's been changing a little bit over the recent years, which is good. You see more of the type 1 community talking about insulin sensitivity, which is great. With type 2 diabetes, I think there is a little bit more of an acknowledgement of lifestyle, even amongst regular, physicians. But I think there's just a lack of confidence that the patients will do anything about it. So they do go to the first line of defense, which is, metformin's the first drug, and then it can proceed to other drugs after that. But the bottom line is, whether it's more insulin, whether it's metformin, whether it's Ozempic, it doesn't matter what medication it is. it's not addressing the root cause, right? Nobody developed, I guess in type 1 diabetes, you did develop it because of a lack of insulin. But for type 2 diabetes, you didn't develop type 2 diabetes for a lack of metformin or a lack of Ozempic, right? It was a lifestyle condition. And it's the food choices, it's the exercise choices, even stress management, like all these things can compile to end up with official diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. So the problem is, it's just that is the problem. You're not addressing the root cause, and that root cause is the root issue that is the increased risk of the complications of diabetes. So just because you fix somebody's blood glucose levels through medication or even not even eating carbs or something, that doesn't mean that you've addressed the root problem. So you could have good blood glucose readings, but you could still die of a heart attack. And heart disease is the #1 cause of death for people living with all forms of diabetes. So we have to address the root cause if we want to address diabetes and the comorbidities that come with it.
Gotcha.
I have a question before we go on.
Yeah.
Type 2 diabetes, usually it's in the families.
Okay.
I mean, you have people, have a mother and dad that both have diabetes, type 2, not 1. Their kids are probably going to have diabetes.
So for type 1 diabetes, yes, there's a definitely genetic component that we don't fully understand. We don't know, how to stop in many cases. That's true. With type 2 diabetes, there is also a genetic component. Certain ethnicities are more likely statistically to develop diabetes. So there's a kernel of truth there. But the biggest truth is that it's lifestyle habits that are passed down from generation to generation. They're eating similarly. So, there's been people who've come across our program and other programs from our fellow, teachers, mentors, who've completely, right, whether they're Asian, whether they're African American, whether they're Caucasian, just fully reverse type 2 diabetes, right? Just, it's like, so in that case, it wasn't the genes that dictated that person's future. It was the fact that they could change their lifestyle to no longer be a type 2 diabetic. So there's more power in your lifestyle than genes when it comes to type 2 diabetes. It's not true for type 1 diabetes.
Right. So then tell us about the success that people have had with your program. Like, you have some numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. We had like a little retrospective evaluation. I'll pull it up on our website. Where we had a group of researchers come in and do a survey, and they asked participants who'd been through our program to share their results. Now, in the study, we certainly cover the limitations of this, right? This is not the ideal form of research because not everybody who did the program is going to fill out that survey. And the people who are going to fill out the survey are most likely to have done the program and enjoyed it, right? So that's the biggest issue with a research study like this. But nonetheless, the results still represent what happens when individuals do the program, right? So that's the key point. And this was people living with all forms of diabetes that went through the program. And I'm going to pull up these statistics here. It's actually loading in a moment. So basically, there were participants with type 2 diabetes. They reduced their A1C by an average of 2% during their participation in our coaching program. Participants lost an average of 20 pounds. 52% of participants reduced their use of medications. These are diabetes medications, while still improving their blood glucose. That's significant, okay?
Wow.
Because oftentimes what happens is, let's say somebody comes in our program and let's say their A1C is 6.4%, and they're using 2,000 milligrams of metformin. That's what you call a medicated A1C. If they weren't on the metformin, the A1C would have been higher, right? Then they decide to change their lifestyle. They're not using the meds anymore, and their A1C drops to 5.3%. That's a huge change, right? Let's just say it went from 6.4 to 5.4, right? That still puts them in non-diabetic. That's a 1% drop. The average was a 2% drop. But that's powerful because they also aren't using medications anymore. So that's a huge improvement. 78% of participants lost weight regardless of the type of diabetes they were living with. So that's
Wow.
what happened, when people do it, right? So if you're like, yeah, I'm going to do this, you can expect results in that ballpark. And if you're going to do it even a little further, like the compliance is a little higher, you're going to do likely even better.
Excellent. And you had great results with type 1 diabetes. So we know that it's not a cure for type 1, but what are the advantages of being able to live this lifestyle and reduce you've been able to reduce the amount of insulin that you use, right?
Yeah, so for me, what happened is my insulin sensitivity just went through the roof. It was literally a 900% change. So I can calculate these numbers with our modern day nutrition software, where I can actually calculate the exact amount of glucose that I consume. So I can take out fructose and I can take out fiber, right? Because those two, molecules, they don't need insulin in order to be metabolized. Okay. So I can go into these softwares. I can actually calculate how much glucose was I eating on a, low carb ketogenic diet. I did a plant-based version of that versus how much glucose am I consuming now when I'm eating a low-fat plant-based whole food diet, embracing, lots of fruits and greens and just enjoying these whole foods. And that change went from like a 1-to-1 to over a 10-to-1, right? So a ratio of glucose to insulin, right? So that's a 900% change. It's very significant. And what that's done is, number one, it's given me confidence in my reduced risk for complications associated with type 1 diabetes. I have been living with it for over 24 years. I don't have any complications. My vision is 20/20. Never been hospitalized, never passed out for a low blood glucose or anything like that. So I feel good about that track record. And I also, like you're saying here, so my insulin sensitivity is high, but that also means that my blood glucose is more predictable, which is what you want for type 1. You're trying to avoid this roller coaster of going high and low and not knowing why you went high. And like, you just that's frustrating. It's happened to everybody living with type 1 at some point for a variety of reasons. It could happen, but poor lifestyle habits is the number one reason. And so that's what really improves my quality of life. And then also, type 1 diabetes is basically a game of educated guesses. Like every time you want to eat food, you're going to make the best guess with all the information that you have of what is the right amount of insulin to inject for how much food you're about to eat. There's a lot of factors and nobody's ever perfect, but you're just making your best guess. And sometimes you miss. Sometimes you end up high after that meal. Sometimes you end up low. And when you end up high, the ability to get out of that high quickly is very, very powerful in our method, right? So that ability to, because you're insulin sensitive, when you make a correction, you can get back into range quicker rather than getting stuck at this high number all day where you don't feel so good and you're frustrated that you're, losing time in range on your CGM, continuous glucose monitor. That's another benefit of this lifestyle for sure. But definitely the energy, right? To be active, to be confident in being active. So that's a big part of our method. We teach people how to, be confident moving their body with the medications that they're using.
You touched a little bit on the fact that Alzheimer's has been referred to as type 3 diabetes. So could you elaborate on that a little bit? How does living a plant-based, low-fat lifestyle help us to live longer and healthier, age healthy?
Great question. So there's friends of ours, Dr. Dean and Aisha Sherzai. They wrote a book called The Alzheimer's Solution. And then they also came out with a really nice cookbook. I think it's the Alzheimer's Solution Cookbook. And, I would really direct, if somebody's listening and they're like, that's a focus of theirs, I cannot recommend those resources enough. They'll take it to a whole nother level for you in depth. And they did a lot of research themselves in this field, funded by the NIH, really, high quality research. So at the end of the day, it's literally as simple as making insulin work more efficiently. And if you're like, okay, how do I test that? One of the best tests that you could get is just a fasting insulin.
They always talk about Alzheimer's patients have this plaque developing in their brain. does that have something to do with the diet that we eat?
Well, plaque developing in any arterial tissue is definitely has a dietary connection, no question. I can't say I'm an expert on that research, but yeah, it's also a big debate, right, on how much of that could be reversed, how much could be reversed in the brain. You know, even the share. I mean, it's a complex topic. You're better off trying to prevent that as doing everything you can to prevent it. You know, getting a coronary calcium test and consultation with the right medical professionals is probably a good idea as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Prevention is always better, right?
No question. No question.
Okay, so what about the future? Do you have any big plans for you and Cyrus for things that you're working on?
I would like to try every mango variety on the entire planet.
Oh, how many are there?
There's over 5,000. So
really?
That's one goal for the future.
You're going to be doing some traveling.
Exactly. There's going to be some fun traveling to some tropical places. Those are my favorite places to go.
Yeah.
So, but in all seriousness, we want to figure out ways to get more people to be aware of this option and have the opportunity to execute it with support and guidance and not feel alone. I think right now a lot of people just aren't even aware that, oh wow, like I could do this. I'm living with diabetes and I can have potatoes and rice and quinoa and mangoes. Like that's just, a lot of people just think that I can't do that. And some people, we have reached them and they do know about it, but they don't want to do it. Okay, fine, fair enough, but at least you know. And then the people who want to do it, we want to support them and make sure they get all the information that we wish we had when we first started. We'd want to help people skip those mistakes and just get to the good stuff and really enjoy the best mangoes.
Okay. And where can people find out more about you?
Okay, so the best place to go is our website, masteringdiabetes.org. You could even type in .com, I'll send it to the right place. You can just Google us as well. And our website has a lot of recipes. It has a lot of articles, a lot of stories. You guys are a lot of fun. Your channel's entertaining, and I appreciate what you're doing. And it was nice to see you all today.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us, Robbie. We really appreciate it.